Hi, and welcome to Lightning Talk Session A, Accessibility. Our first lightning talk of this session is Accessibility in Making, Perspectives from Disability Self-Advocates. Amelia Anderson and Abigail Phillips recorded this talk previously, and we will watch that now.
Hello, I am Amelia Anderson, and this is Accessibility in Making, along with Abigail Phillips, who could not be here today, but is happy to also present this work with us. So this is going to be a very fast 10-minute presentation. I've tried to condense everything that's very important into this very short amount of time that we have. But of course, we are available for follow-up questions, not only after this session, but ongoing as well, if you would like to chat about this further with us. But this is the result of an IMLS grant of the same name, Accessibility in Making. And we are going to share with you it's two parts. First, how we conducted the study. I know we're joined probably by mostly other researchers today. So we'll tell you a little bit about the methods that we used. And then we are going to talk about the practical implications, mainly for library practitioners, a little bit for researchers as well. But kind of holistically, this study came about because we realized that in public library spaces, of which Dr. Phillips and I both share a background as former public librarians, that the disability community is often overlooked when creating spaces and programs and services for them. This is not just Makerspaces. This is in general, unfortunately, but Makerspaces, of course, are included in that. So in this study, we sought specifically feedback from library patrons and library staff as well who have disabilities in better understanding Makerspaces for them. So first, we're going to, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about the study design, a little bit about background, recruitment, and then data collection and analysis. And then I've got a few slides that show the practical implications. So instead of going through findings and discussion, I'm just going to show you kind of the results there and what that really means for practice. This work has been published. Well, we've actually presented and published a lot about this. There was a high demand for information about the study, which is great. But the main results are published in a manuscript in Library Quarterly. And so I can provide that citation if you want the whole thing. So first of all, a little bit about the background of this study. We did base the study using the social model of disability. This is in contrast to the medical model. And the social model is, again, we don't have a ton of time to dig deep into any of this, but kind of in a nutshell, the social model is more of an assumption that disability is not an individual deficit, but instead more of a social construct in which environmental barriers are taken into account. And that is more of what disables a person. Of course, there's more to it than that, but that's kind of the short answer of it. The reason why we thought this was important in makerspaces is because makerspaces allow for tinkering in a low pressure environment. Oftentimes work in a makerspace, not all the time, but oftentimes it's not assessed. It's kind of a place to be creative and play and have fun. There have been other studies that have shown that it's increased individuals, in particular this study that I note here for long-term care facilities, it contributes to residents' senses of competence, autonomy, relatedness, identity, which all translate very nicely to disability as well. So we thought that there was a really strong potential um, for this work. So in designing this study, for data collection, we had three groups of participants. We had library staff who work with patrons with disabilities, but then, as I mentioned, we also worked with library staff with disabilities and also patrons with disabilities as well. This was, when I say patrons with disabilities, this was based broadly across the United States. So not looking at one library in particular, but instead looking at public libraries, again, across the US. And so looking at people who identified as using a public library makerspace anywhere in the United States. We wanted these results to be broad and not specific to one site. We provided a lot of accessibility options. So people could participate how they felt most comfortable through focus groups if they wanted. And within those focus groups, they could choose how much information they wanted to reveal about themselves. They could choose to be on camera or off. They could choose to use a real name or remain anonymous. And then if they didn't feel comfortable participating in a focus group, which, an aside, we were suggested by an advisory board member to do focus groups because that community building aspect was important for some individuals with disabilities. But then if they didn't feel comfortable disclosing, for example, in a focus group, then we also offered the opportunity to do interviews. And then if they wanted to do something even with less face-to-face interaction, they could do a survey. And we asked the same questions within all of those. Largely a qualitative study, a lot of open-ended questions, inductive and deductive coding, and then qualitative methods to analyze. I'm going to go forward, I think. Well, let me just say quickly, we also did member checks with participants that we thought was very important. So we went back and made sure that we were reflecting their experiences as we were, transcribing. Okay, so in the interest of time, moving forward, I feel like there's so much more I want to tell you, but again, we can continue this conversation later. So here are the recommendations for practice based on our findings. And again, these are published, so I'll go through them kind of quickly and highlight just a few on each page. So one of the things that we found that was the importance of reducing physical barriers. Here are some of these suggestions. Again, I'll just kind of highlight a few of them. One thing we noticed that was really an important finding, I think, was that you can do as much as you want to make the makerspace accessible in a public library, but if the building is not accessible, then what are you doing? And if you place the makerspace in an area of your public library, similarly, that is not accessible, that kind of cancels out the good work you've done. So make sure that your makerspace not only is inclusive within, but also you're able to access that makerspace within the building. Lots of other really important things here. Again, this is all available to you. This is uploaded to this forum as well. We also found out that it was important to minimize sensory concerns, kind of the standard things. Reducing clutter, reducing fluorescent lighting. One thing specific to makerspaces was to be careful with things like smells, especially if you're letting people bring in their own materials, because those things can be really triggering. Of course, supporting technology use, depending on whether you have a low-tech or high-tech makerspace. And then to effectively share information, that instructions must be provided in multiple formats and sharing it in advance when possible. Supporting learning activities and events, and then offer opportunities to support community building, this was a big one. And I think the one that I want to leave you with here is to, instead of providing disability-friendly events, make sure that all of your events are inclusive. Because that is a very, that was something that came up again and again, was that that participants really enjoyed getting to be a part of the community within the makerspace and just kind of do all the things that anybody else would want to do. And so sectioning them off into a disability event, while it may be with the best of intentions, is really not the way to go. So instead, make all of your events and services inclusive. Thank you so much.
Hi, we will now hear from we will now hear the lightning discussion. Making is for everyone. Lessons learned from library makerspaces for youth with disabilities. Our presenter for this lightning discussion are Yongju Jung, Moses Manyao, and June Abbas.
It's great to be here to talk with all of you today. Thank you, Amelia, for that wonderful presentation. And I think it's great the order that we're following, because we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the findings we found in our study that is related to youth with disabilities within makerspaces. And I am Dr. June Abbas. I am honored to work with a great research team, Dr. Jiangju Zhang and Moses Manyao, who is our wonderful doctoral student on this project. I'm going to go into a lot of background because I think Amelia did a really excellent job of that. But let's talk about our project overview to give you an idea of what we've been doing in this project. This project was funded by the Institute for Museum and Library Services. It began in 2022, and it is an ongoing project. There are various different stages to it. In 2022 and 2023, we conducted a nationwide survey of public libraries who had makerspaces that were providing maker programming for youth with disabilities. And that became quite a challenge to find participants, because we heard the same story as we have inclusive programming, which was really great to hear. We also included interviews during this time period, where we interviewed librarians across the United States. And then in 2023 through 2024, we have been visiting exemplary public libraries in various different states. We completed 5 visits during that time period. And then in 2024, 2025, we have been conducting additional visits to public library makerspaces. And our focus this year is developing design principles and guidelines. So the rationale for our study, and I'm just going to go briefly into this, and then Dr. Zhang and Moses will present some of the findings from our survey, but also from our visits to the makerspaces and what we're learning about the design of makerspaces in general. So the rationale for our study was that when we wrote the grant, there was very little research related to library makerspaces, specifically for making programming or makerspaces designed for youth with disabilities, or even with people in general with disabilities. And so I was really great to hear Abigail's findings today as well. But there has been a lack of research on libraries' actual practices and library professionals' actual experiences and perceptions within makerspaces in general. And so today we're going to talk to you a little bit more about the findings of our study. And I'm going to turn the camera over to Dr. Jung, or to Moses now, excuse me.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Abbas, for that introduction. So as Dr. Abbas said, our first year included conducting surveys to different public libraries. And one of the questions in our survey was trying to identify whether the public libraries did have learners with disabilities in their maker programs or their makerspaces. And out of the 123 respondents on that question, only 64 mentioned that they had learners with disabilities visiting their makerspaces or maker program sessions. The other part was regarding the programs designed specifically for learners or youth with disabilities, and only 10 out of 121 who responded to that question mentioned that they had programs or they facilitated programs for users with disabilities. So there are many lessons we learned from our interviews, the survey, and even the site visits, and I'm just going to highlight a few. And one is regarding the physical space readiness. And this, I'm going to look at it twofold. One, accessibility in the space and accessibility to the space. So when you talk about accessibility in the space, we learned the need for having the necessary tools and equipment. So for example, power outlets, height adjustable and movable tables and chairs, noise dampening headphones, among other tools and equipment. Then when you talk about accessibility to the space, for example, there's a picture right there of a makerspace from one of the public libraries. So that space is just next to the entrance where we have a parking lot reserved for youth with disabilities or any other persons with disabilities. So there's easy access to the space. Then when we talk about inclusivity, we also think about having sensory rooms where youth with disabilities are able to visit depending on their sensory needs. The other lesson that we learned, and this comes from a more personal level, is staff mindset. So believing in everyone's abilities and for the staff to be able to, and their willingness to be able to serve all users depending on their abilities. And then also the part about being proactive in terms of programming and the space itself. And I'll hand it over to Dr. Jung to expound more on the proactive actions among other lessons.
Okay. So I will continue by sharing what we've learned from the interviews and some exemplary visits. So many library professionals that we met emphasized the importance of actively and proactively reaching out. First, of course, that includes like promoting and inviting youth with disabilities to existing opportunities and programs like the previous presentation also mentioned. Many libraries use specific segments on their websites or registration systems, such as anyone who needs accommodations can reach out, blah, blah, blah. However, one important point that we found here was though, instead of just listing the library's general phone number or email or just sort of a general information, having a specific contact person in charge seemed to be incredibly helpful. And additionally, librarians from those exemplary libraries reach out directly to some community organizations related to disabilities or special education programs to invite them to the programs and the makerspaces. And then another key strategy was developing programs specifically for youth with disabilities. This requires a different perspectives a little bit because while most libraries say that anyone is welcome in their programs in the library and the makerspaces, some youth with disabilities might still feel hesitant to attend. However, when a maker program was offered explicitly designed for youth with disabilities, but open to everyone, then youth with disabilities and their caregivers often feel more welcome. And then some libraries also offer some exclusive programs for youth with disabilities in the makerspaces by partnering with specific organizations and schools. And another notable aspect was that some libraries have a dedicated staff member and who is responsible for accessibility. Those staff members actively collaborate with various departments within the library system, such as Makerspace, Children's Department, or STEAM Department, depending on what they have, as well as those other external organizations and special educations, classrooms, etc. And these staff members also were able to provide training for other staff members in the library on accessibility and inclusivity. Though we acknowledge that it is a little bit hard to actually have a dedicated member because of the budget issues and everything. So we just share very brief findings today. We are in the final phase of the project and we are still making additional visits. So if you're interested in participating, please let me know. And we've been developing design principles and recommendations for library makerspaces and maker programming for youth with disabilities. And we hope to share more updates and additional details in the future with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that awesome amount of information. We will now move on to our third lightning talk in this series, promoting computational thinking skills for blind and visually impaired learners through accessible library makerspace. And this is from Kyung-ko and Ju-young Seo.
Hello, everyone. This is really great to have all those like accessibility project in library makerspaces. A lot of findings resonate our project too. We discussed the practicality of accessibility a lot. Like, for example, as the previous project mentioned, we couldn't change our physical building much, but we could identify some priority areas and low-hanging fruits that we could improve. So it was really great to hear lots of commonalities across the project. So again, this is Dr. Kyung-won Ko, an associate professor and the director of Champaign-Urbana Community Fab Lab. And I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Ju-young Seo. And together we'll be presenting on our 3-year national leadership grant from the IMLS project. It's called Promoting Computational Thinking Skills for Blind and Visually Impaired Youth through Accessible Library Makerspaces. For this project, we partnered with the Reaching Across Illinois Library Systems and American Printing House for Blind and ALA-YALSA. So now I'll hand it over to Dr. Seo, the principal investigator of this project, to share the background and motivation behind our work.
Hi, thanks, Dr. Ko. Hello, everyone. I'm Ju-young Seo, assistant professor at the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois, and also a faculty affiliate at the Civil School of Computing and Data Science and National Center for Supercomputing Applications. I'm also a lifelong blind learner. So about this project, the background. This project is deeply rooted in my own journey as a blind researcher in STEM fields. Growing up, career opportunities for blind and visually impaired individuals seemed extremely limited. Many peers often turn to massage therapy as their primary career option. However, discovering programming, computer, these dramatically changed my life, unlocking a new world filled with possibilities and independence. This transformative personal experience inspired me to explore ways to empower young blind and low vision learners through computational thinking skills, enabling them to envision broader career paths and life opportunities. Next slide. Yet, significant challenges remain. Only 45% of blind and visually impaired adults aged 16 to 65 are employed, compared to 75% of sighted learners. Blind individuals disproportionately face poverty and limited access to higher paying STEM careers. And computational thinking education such as coding and robotics remain largely inaccessible due to mostly visually oriented learning materials. Next slide, please. Our project tackles these challenges using a multimodal approach. Specifically, we emphasize maker learning, grounded in constructionism and tangible interaction, co-design practices that nurture interdependence and collaboration between sighted and blind participants. Ability-based design that prioritize and leverage each learner's strengths. With this approach, we aim to make computational thinking accessible and empower blind and visually impaired learners and their sense of agency in STEM and beyond. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Ko for the remainder of this presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Sao. So ultimately, as Dr. Sao described, our project aims to design a more welcoming, inclusive, and accessible makerspace for BVI users while exploring the experiences and perceptions of both the BVI learners and librarians or maker professionals. The study consists of 4 phases, integrating both design and research activities. And since time is limited, I'll quickly highlight a few key points and share where you can find more resources on this project in the end. So our research team and the CUC Fab Lab instructors developed a hands-on coding and electronics program using tangible tools designed to enhance BVI learners' computational thinking skills. The developed program was pilot tested with 3 BVI learners during a summer camp in partnership with the Chicago Lighthouse, and data were collected from both BVI learners and maker professionals. Then we expanded the program to 3 different library makerspaces. Librarians first participated in a training workshop at the CUC Fab Lab, received a maker kit, then engaged the BVI users in their library makerspaces. To help your understanding of what tangible and hands-on programs looks like, let me show you some of the tools we used. So first, Snap Circuit is a tool for teaching basic engineering, electronics, and circuitry concepts by using building components with the snaps to assemble electronic circuits on a simple row and column space grid. And Code Jumper, this is a tool specifically designed to teach BVI learners computer coding. So with Code Jumper, you design physical block code. So it helps learners grasp coding concepts by enabling them to feel how virtual codes are mapped onto physical block-based pod, with each pod representing a specific function. So we're currently analyzing data in these areas. So far, we have found both learners and instructors noted that such hands-on tools enhanced learners' understanding of computational and electronics concepts, although the text-based coding platform still seemed challenging. So we have suggestions for librarians and maker professionals who work with BVI populations. So one major adaptation for our instructors when they transitioned from teaching sighted learners to BVI learners was the extensive use of verbal descriptions. So instructors emphasized that verbal description must be detailed, specific, and include tactile sensory information. So an instructor described that, so instead of saying, grab this from your kit, you had to say, reach into the power bag. You're going to feel around for a thicker wire that's a square end on one side and a rectangular end on the other. So the instructors used tactile cues rather than visual ones. For example, instead of saying the yellow dial, they said the round bumpy knob. And instead of saying over there, they gave precise navigation directions, such as to your left, to the right, right? So at the same time, such detailed verbal instructions could lead to audio and verbal information overload. To reduce this, we encourage you use different tactile learning materials when possible. So for example, a swell for machine, that's what Dr. So is demonstrating in this picture. So you draw a chart or image, place it in the machine, and it raises the lines so BVI individuals can touch and feel them. So finally, understanding the diverse needs of BBI learners and providing personalized assistance was crucial. So in our pilot program, we had a small group of 3 learners, each with different needs, like 2 were blind, 1 had limited vision, 1 could read Braille, while the other 2 could not. So as a result, for example, their needs for Braille versus large font levels were different. Here are some research approaches that we'd like to share. So first, recruitment in this type of research is a common challenge. So flexibility, adaptability, and creativity in turning challenges into opportunities seems to be the key. So our initial plan for the pilot program was to host a summer camp at the CUC Fab Lab, allowing BVI learners to experience the campus. However, this turns out to be difficult because there are few BVI youth in our town, and traveling is challenging, especially since guardians would need to take time off to accompany them. So as a result, we shifted our approach and formed a new partnership with the Chicago Lighthouse. And instead of bringing participants to us, our team traveled to Chicago and ran the camps there. Another common challenge is collecting data in library settings. So while real-world environments like public libraries could be ideal for observing and collecting like natural interactions, they are not designed for research. And we found like many libraries are open to partnering on creative programs, especially with ready-to-run programs, but conducting interviews or surveys with users may not always be feasible in library settings. So our approach in this project was to design an innovative program at a university-based makerspace and offer a free workshop as a pilot, and we collected extensive data from participants during the pilot, and we disseminate the program to different libraries. We conducted follow-up interviews with the librarians, but we did not collect data from the users on site, aiming to reduce the research burden on our partner libraries. The hands-on coding and electronics programs we developed in this project are available. So please check out the URL, QR code here. The video tutorials are also available on the CUC Fab Lab YouTube channel. So you're welcome to adapt the program based on the needs of your community. So thank you for listening, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you for sharing those awesome tools, and I look forward to checking that out more. We are going to listen to our last session in this section today, and then we'll follow up with some Q&A after that. So our next discussion is factors influencing intention to introduce accessibility in makerspace planning and implementation by Heather Moorfield-Lang and Anna Dobjevec. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I always joke that I'm typically the one who's standing between the end of your presentation and lunch, and here I am again. So thank you so much for having me. It is just me, Heather, today. My partner in crime for this particular paper, Ada Danjakovic, she is suffering at Disney World, so poor girl. So she's having fun down in Florida. So that's me with my typical pink hair. If you have any questions, want to talk further, if I raise anything that you'd like to discuss, that's my email. This is Anna and her email. Her background is I am now an associate professor at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Anna and I used to work together at the University of South Carolina. I in their library science program and her in music libraries. So for this particular study, it was written a couple of years ago, and I have the citation for it at the end. We specifically decided to do a mixed methods piece looking at the theory of planned behavior. So what intention had to do with makerspaces in school libraries, and this is specifically focused on school libraries. So when you're looking at the theory of planned behavior, you're looking at attitude, subjective norms, as well as perceived behavioral controls with and how they affect each other, as well as intention. So some of the questions that we, for this particular study, I think I get to my methodology here in just a few minutes, but for this particular study, we were looking at school libraries, K through 12 in the United States that did have makerspaces. So yes, there was, a couple of limits. So when you're looking at behavioral intention, we were asking questions. This was a questionnaire survey of which we drew our information from. We did not actually visit these particular libraries because we were looking at, with what our librarians have under their control, do they make their spaces accessible? Do they intend to, do they have control over it? There was a lot of different aspects along those lines. So if you're looking at behavioral intention, we were asking questions like, I intend to make my makerspace more accessible. I will work on making my makerspace accessible, or I will improve makerspace, the accessibility in my makerspace. If you're looking at the subjective norms, we were looking more at my students believe accessibility is important. My faculty believe accessibility is important, and parents believe is accessibility important. Now, rarely did we have any situations where folks didn't feel it was important, but then taking the steps to make spaces available, was that in the realm of possibilities? Possibly, sometimes not. If your library is already 2 stories or your makerspace doesn't have a wide enough door, or how your libraries are set up with or without your control as a school librarian may have some effect on your intentions and what you plan to, do in your space. And then perceived control behaviors, which are the items that we can control as school librarians. I can secure the resources to make my makerspace more accessible. I can gain enough knowledge to make my makerspace more accessible. I can speak to people about it. I can find the resources that I need, and I can secure financial support to make my makerspace more accessible. And for anyone who delves into school libraries, period, that budgets are always a problem, much less makerspaces and school libraries. I do a lot of different work with accessibility. These days I'm doing more with online learning and online teaching with accessibility. I'm the accessibility fellow here at UNC Greensboro, or one of 2, who help our peer faculty members on how to create their online courses to be universally designed and accessible to all users. And then our last area was attitude toward behavior. Is accessibility essential for a useful makers, for a, go Spartans. And for a successful makerspace, I consider makerspace accessibility a top priority, and a well-designed makerspace must be accessible. So if you ever want to delve further into this, or see our questionnaire, or look at our questions, or springboard off of any of this, trust me, much more research is needed. We created a survey instrument with Likert scale as well as open-ended questions. Our sample included 116 participants, as I said, K through 12 in the US, those that did have makerspaces. We sent the survey out to like national and state listservs, along with a variety of types of social media, many more than I use now. But you know, we were out there on Twitter and Facebook and all different state listservs across the US for school librarianship. And then all participating librarians did have a makerspace within the time frame ranging from 8 years to less than a year of since they've been implementing a makerspace in their library. But most of the participants had had theirs for at least 2 years. Many of our participants were elementary school, but respondents did span all of the different levels. So our outcomes, and just like everyone else, this is a quick rundown of, you know, what's a full article that's published. But and I focus more on the qualitative parts, while Anna was much more our quantitative area, our expert in that, which is why I wrote with her, because if I'm going to do a mixed method studies, I'm going to have that little extra aid for sure. Some of the things that we realized is that identifying makerspace accessibility is the top priority, and agreeing that it should be accessible might be different in the minds of the school librarians. Librarians wanted to be in control of the changes that could happen to their space and for their learning communities, but it wasn't always possible. School librarians had the least amount of confidence, or at least only somewhat had confidence, that other actors, administration, teachers, parents, students, considered accessibility essential. This could be lack of information, lack of understanding, just ableism. There's a wide range of reasons why folks would be like, well, I mean, it would be nice, but you know, it's not a top priority to have a successful makerspace. Perceived behavioral competence was the most influential predictor of behavioral intention, as in, you know, if I feel that this is the way it should go, then, you know, they want, if they feel strongly enough about it, it's going to have the intent. They're going to want to try to push through, you know, decisions made for the makerspace. But, you know, it could, for all practical purposes, be considered one of the sole predictors, at least within the folks that we talked to. I thought I had more slides. So there, have some more other areas about this. So some of the limitations, as well as issues with this particular study was, we are only focusing on school librarians. We would love to do a study similar to this with public and academic librarians. It's just taking time. And then we also found that, as I said in the discussions, the perceived information from, no, that's right. Yeah. So just bringing this back up. You know, with intent and what we plan and what we want to do are different things. School librarians certainly felt that accessibility was important, but did they have the power to implement changes to their makerspace? Because there's always other people who are approving their budgets, you know, approving whether to, you know, have makerspace, teachers coming in and bringing their students to the makerspace, along those lines. The other limitation that we found was that while we defined accessibility multiple times, there was confusion about the term accessibility. And so what that means is, sorry, I'm in a LEED certified building. The lights turn off when it doesn't know I'm there. So we would speak about accessibility, and, you know, I would ask, what are some accessible makerspace activities? What are different items you've done to, you know, make your makerspace more accessible to your students and community? And they were like, well, do you mean access? Because as our first speaker for this rotation of presentations mentioned, you can do all the accessibility stuff you want in your space, but if they can't even come in the door, if there's not access into the building, if the makerspace is on the second floor and there's no elevator, you know, so on and so forth. So some of the questions were answered very much as to access, or did they make the resources and tools in the makerspace at the library accessible to the students so they could get to them or have them or use them. And so for the future, there would definitely need to be more clarification when it comes to what we are looking for in that way. There's so many surprise benefits to adding. I just see Fab Lab Jen. There's so many surprise benefits to adding accessible tech. We added cheap touchscreens, and we started seeing more children that never use a mouse made more accessible. Yes, exactly. So that's our study. Again, I am more than happy to share more. I've got my I'll scroll back here real quick for my contact information. Get in touch, always happy to chat. And I know they wanted to leave some time open for questions. So thank you so much for listening very quickly to our study.
Thank you so much. We will now open the floor for questions. You will be able to unmute and ask questions. We have about 5 minutes. So does anybody have any questions for any of our presenters in this session? And also feel free to put questions in the chat if you don't want to unmute and talk. That's okay too. Our first question is, has anybody noticed pushback from management regarding EID? Anybody want to take that?
I'm happy to answer in my area. We are starting to get some pushback, especially at a university that is the most diverse campus in the UNC system. This is not specifically related to my my study, but we are having at UNC Greensboro, we're having to list all of our different classes for anything that's EDI and courses just for the knowledge. But then also a wide range of there's a lot of things that have been stopped or halted, but we are certainly dealing with some of the fallout. I'm also the accessibility fellow here, and so we're having to look at the new laws for that as well, and making sure that things are implemented for online learning. This is not specifically Makerspace, but we are starting to have some.
We have any other questions for our presenters? All right, if there are no further questions, I thank all of the presenters for their amazing research that they presented today. I know I got a lot out of that and have some takeaways to take back to my space, so thank you. And we hope to see everybody back for the next round of discussions after a quick lunch break.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our lightning talk session C on assessment. My name is Lisa Regala. I'm going to be helping to moderate our session today. We have 3 amazing presentations lined up for you. How this will work is that each presenter will have 10 minutes to do their presentation. And then at the end, we hope to have about 10 minutes for Q&A. While the presentations are going on, feel free to put anything that pops up in your head in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat as we go, but during that Q&A time, we'll also open it up and you'll be able to unmute if you would like to ask questions as well. So without further ado, we're going to kick it off with our first presentation, which is entitled Values-Based Assessment, Designing Assessment for Learning in Library Makerspaces. Sam Abramovich and Peter Wardrop unfortunately couldn't be here today, but they were kind enough to do a recorded talk for us. And so we're going to launch that right now.
Hi there. My name's Peter Wardrop. I'm from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm going to try to quickly talk about values-based assessment for library makerspaces. And this work is also done with Sam Abramovich from the University at Buffalo and Kai Saplan at University of Wisconsin-Madison here. Let me turn the slide. It's also worth acknowledging some of our other collaborators. I won't take all the time to explain how great they all are. I encourage you to Google them. But this work cannot be done without great partners in the process. So the takeaways that I want you to get from this, and I hope to squeeze it in by the end of my 10 minutes. Assessment is a value-laden endeavor. Local values of what we think of as being important for our learning experiences can shape what, why, and how assessment happens. And this approach of values-based assessment represents a great opportunity for professional growth for maker educators in libraries, as well as other places. So I'm not going to take the time to tell you about how important and how innovative library educators have been with respect to maker-based learning. But I do want to highlight what we already know is maker-based learning experiences in libraries are heterogeneous, variable. They vary by age level of learners. They vary by the amount of time spent on the activity. They vary in the activities themselves, whether they're independent or collaborative, or what the learner is actually supposed to do with the activities. It's variable, to say the least. And that makes assessment in library makerspaces challenging. It's not only this heterogeneity, but it's also the multiple roles of assessment. When I'm talking about assessment, I mean making evidence-based claims about what our learners are able to do, what they know, and are able to accomplish. Not necessarily talking about quantitative counting of indicators or variables, not talking about standardization. And actually, we're talking about the opposite of that. So I do want to just say that this work is in conversation and inspired by some other wonderful and important research. The work that Sam and his colleagues did on their assessment matrix that looked at the alignment between what you're measuring and how you're measuring it in a library makerspace. And Rebecca Teasdale and colleagues work on values and evaluation, but also evaluation criteria in library makerspaces. And this specific, what I'm talking about, values-based assessment, is based on other work that I've done with other colleagues. And values-based assessment is fundamentally engaging with what we as educators, what we as professionals value for learning and engagement in our programs and spaces, and identifying what evidence constitutes engagement in that value. So if we value curiosity what does it look like for our learners to be curious in our space, and how can we collect information on that? So one example of this is this is from a paper that I can share with you all. We looked at what library educators defined as success. That was sort of our way of entry point in thinking about what they valued. How did they talk about success in their maker programs? And we interviewed 17 library professionals directly working in maker programs or makerspace in 2 different library systems. And we identified, based on their responses, we identified a varying array of types of success, but we noticed these properties of success, which is kind of interesting. It's properties of success. It's like who's expected to demonstrate success and what that success looks like, and who do you share those instances of success with once you sort of gather that. And these sort of properties of success are important because if we want our library educators to be the designers and implementers of assessment, of deciding what gets assessed and how it gets assessed, coming to terms with these properties of success are important. And to do that, we designed a couple of tools. I'll share one example. After this, I can share the others. But this properties of success analysis tool is really a way of making visible what success looks like or what it is, but also considering different aspects of that success, such as the time scale of when to look for it, or the kinds of data that can show that success is happening or not happening. But a crucial aspect of this is it's not truly a binary of success is happening or not. It's often, as you probably guess, it's in your own work. It's the extent to which success is being achieved and in what ways and for whom. And so coming to terms with that with this tool and some other tools that we developed are ways that professionals and teams of professionals working in library makerspaces can collectively and systematically start to collect data that's important to what they value. The implications for this work is what we would argue is the importance of building local assessments, the assessments that are tied to what the educators see as being important. And that is in contrast to a lot of motivations for assessment that currently exists in educational spaces where assessment is used to compare. And that comparison relies on standardization, that we're assessing the same things in the same ways in Madison, Wisconsin, as we are in Buffalo, New York. And what we're saying is that those situations, those settings in a library makerspace probably aren't the same. And even if they're doing the same activity, it gets enacted by different age levels, different arrays of learners, and focusing on what is really important for the local library is a path forward for understanding impact. And I would just also say this is a great opportunity for professional growth. From previous work that I've done in children's museums, this focus on what you value can enable a team of educators to develop a language of learning and a common understanding of what's important for the educational experiences that they provide. And in addition, there's this term that's used in schools a lot about teachers having assessment literacy. And that's this literacy of being able to identify the appropriate evidence to support claims about a particular construct and knowing the ways in which to gather that evidence. It's not easy. And it's especially not easy when what we value for learning engagement are often really powerful but challenging constructs like perseverance or risk-taking or curiosity. And so developing our assessment literacy is also sort of this great opportunity with a focus on values-based assessment. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Sam. I guess you could look up Kai as well. I didn't list her email. And since I have you, I just want to mention really fast, here at the University of Wisconsin, we have an annual conference called Play, Make, Learn. I encourage you to look into it because if you're watching this video, your people are at this conference. In addition, we offer a hybrid learning community called Teacher Studio, which gets together once a month to make something. The link is right there. I encourage you to check it out. And then finally, we offer a certificate program for maker educators, and it's specifically aimed at maker educators that are trying to build a culture of making, a culture of maker-based learning in their organization, in their school, in their library, in their museum, and sometimes not just within their organization, but through their partnerships with other organizations and in their community. And so I would encourage you to check out that website as well. Otherwise, I think that's it. So thanks for watching. I look forward to hearing from you. And I will stop.
All right. So thank you to Peter for that great presentation. I'm going to move us on to our second presentation, which is the observation deck, digital tools for observation, assessment, and analysis. We're joined by Rebecca Miller-John and Amy Holcomb. So I'm going to turn it over to both of them.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. I feel like I'm Rebecca Miller-John, previously of the Bubbler at Madison Public Library, which is where I am presenting this information and context from. But currently I am a Library and Commons Director at UW-Madison. So I'll let Amy introduce herself too.
I'm Amy Holcomb, the Learning Experiences Manager at Skokie Public Library in Illinois. So I oversee all of the events and learning spaces here at the library and worked with Rebecca on developing Observation Deck.
Great. So I feel like Peter's presentation was a great introduction to the observation deck tool because the title says elevating your program assessment, and it could say elevating your values-based program assessment with the observation deck, because that's very much so where this observation tool that we're going to share is coming from, is from that like values-based assumption and trying to get at those really tricky learning outcomes like perseverance and collaboration that Peter, I think, really mentioned in his presentation. So this is the team who has built the observation deck with the wonderful funding and support from the Institute for Museum and Library Sciences, ourselves and Skokie, but also a small rural library in northern Wisconsin, Wapaka, and then Byte Studios, which is our actual developer on the toolkit. So the observation deck came out of years of observational assessment, both at Madison Public Library, also at Skokie, and through the research and partnerships that we've done for a really long time, trying to identify that when we see really amazing things happening in our libraries, or for instance, in the gymnasium at the Juvenile Detention Center, which is where this picture is taken, how do we actually assess what we're seeing? Right? And when we see those glimmers and those amazing visualizations and observations of things like perseverance and like collaboration and like initiatives and agency with youth, how do we assess it? And so we started to realize that like doing documented observational assessment is something that comes naturally to us. Librarians are collectors. They like to collect things. They like to document. They like to journal. But as you think about observation at a large scale, that becomes very complicated and hard to do and hard to keep track of. So we thought that we would, for some reason, embark on the journey of creating a digital tool. And that started with research. So we talked to 70 different people through the scope of our research, both with our initial survey around technology and to our interviews that we did with librarians. And we talked about what data collection, good data collection and observational assessment does. And we came up with some parameters, right, for like what observational assessment would do. And then we talked about why are you actually doing this kind of assessment, right? Like what are your goals with the data and documentation that you would collect? And we heard from our institutions that they really wanted a continuous cycle of improvement, right? The ability to plan better programs and communicate with their staffs about like what good programming models look like and what success looks like in their space in order to recreate it more often. We also found out that they needed a way to share evidence-based outcomes and stories with a variety of different stakeholders, whether that be patrons who are visiting their library programs, library boards who are making decisions about programs, and legislatures about making decisions about budgets. They wanted evidence-based stories that supported these really interesting learning outcomes that were happening in their makerspaces, but also just in their programming spaces. And so this project really took on two different parts. There's the work that you do beforehand, right, to create an observational assessment. And then there's the work that you do while you're assessing and collecting data. And those two parts have to exist together. So even though this whole project was about creating a digital toolkit, without those value-based observational assessment components, that framework that you're observing through, you making those observations is not actually going to be helpful for you. And so we leaned on a bunch of different tools. And this is a tool that we've modified and changed from PLA's project outcome around actually thinking about developing an observational assessment tool. Thinking about your big goals, what do you actually want to see? What are the indicators or like the specific behaviors, actions, and mindsets that you could observe or identify? And then what evidence you would actually capture, right? So like, what does that actually look like in motion and how do you prove that you see those things happening? All with the sake of saying that you're going to plan a better program, right? You have intent with your goals, you plan your program accordingly, you facilitate it, you do your observation, and then you reflect on your success. So I'm actually going to go back one slide, and I'm going to show you an example of what a framework might look like. So this is our website, odec.org, for the observation deck, and I'm going to click on the Bubblers Maker framework. And this is an example of what a framework might look like on paper, because the other thing we know is that you don't need a digital tool to do observational assessment. You can do those assessments on paper. So you'll see our big goals that we have for our programs. And then you'll see those indicators of success that we actually use to tag the observations that we make. And then you'll see a place for actually recording observations and notes that you can tag with those various different components and elements. This is where we started, was actually creating our observational frameworks, working with our partners like Skokie, like WPACA, to think about what are the values that they have for their institutions that they use to plan programs, and turning those into paper frameworks that we then could result from there, use in our digital tool, in our digital format. So the observation deck website is right here. And before I jump in and actually show you guys the digital tool, I was hoping that Amy could talk a little bit about what she's done at Skokie and how this has sort of impacted their program.
Thanks, Rebecca. So like Rebecca said, we were part of the project from day one. A lot of the staff that were working in the learning spaces at the time of development were interviewed by Rebecca and her team to influence how we would move forward with building the toolkit. But we also had a starting point. So we at Skokie have 3 distinct learning spaces that are serving distinct audiences that have similar processes and procedures, but they're open every day. And we were already asking staff to fill out what we refer to as an end of shift report using a Google form. But we were finding that like we weren't getting as much meaningful data as we used to when we first opened, because we've been doing this since 2014 in one way or the other. So we worked on developing a framework for observation deck based on the end of shift report. We started off with, it was pretty much the same, where it mirrored the questions we were asking in the forum on the framework. And we found that it was, again, not useful. So we were able to work with our team to really pare down and say, okay, well, what are we actually looking for and what are we hoping to achieve in these spaces? Because we have goals, we have a vision, we have a strategic plan. So how do we incorporate that into this toolkit so that we're looking for that? And so far, it's been working really well. We transitioned fully over to Observation Deck this summer. We have one framework for all 3 learning spaces. We used to have 2. And now we also have a general programming framework that we're using for periodic observations of programs. When my role changed, I now am overseeing all of public programming, and that's really hard to get a sense of what's working and what's not, and being able to connect with program teams on their facilitation strategies and even content. So I set out 2 months a year right now to use this framework or the program framework in public programs and follow up with individuals to talk about what we can do to improve or what we can do to make things more successful for not only the facilitator, but the public as well. So this has been a really helpful tool for us to better understand what's happening and to also make data-informed changes to our processes and our workflows, essentially.
Yeah. Thanks, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
So there actually is the capability for you to test out the observation deck as a digital tool. And it's in the slide deck. You can go to the website, and then the login that you can use that is our sandbox is from our Play, Make, Learn presentation that the conference Peter was talking about earlier. But I'm also just going to show you really quickly what the observer looks like. Within the observer, you have the opportunity to enter relevant information into an observer, like into a piece. This is a digital format that you can access on your phone or tablet. You have the ability to add observations by taking photos, adding notes, and then tagging with elements from your framework that you have created and input into the observation deck. You have the ability to capture the vibe, which we do on these like weird sliding scales, and give yourself feedback, but it's actually very helpful in actually talking about how a program went. And then you have the ability to add a summary, successes and challenges that you saw, as well as see the data that you've tagged at the top. This is great when it's on your phone or tablet. You can use talk to text, which is an amazing tool that allows you to give that feedback to yourself really clearly and really quickly. From there, your data goes into a reporter, which allows you to see all of the results that you have over time. And you can toggle between modes in order to see the observations that you've made. And you can actually sort those modes by indicators and by dimensions to see evidence of different things that you've noticed in your library programs over time. From this, we've actually been able to generate a series of Canva reports where we're able to pull data from the observation deck into those reports to talk meaningfully about the programs that we've observed. And those reports are both, you can see examples of them here, as well as the various Canva templates that you can download and use for free. So we are really excited about, this is an example of a paper framework. So we're really excited to share with you and to encourage you to think about using the resources from the observation deck to think about creating your own value-based templates and value-based pieces to begin your practice of observational assessment on paper, because we are still working on the open source software that allows us to share the observation deck more broadly. So it is an open source piece of software. If you have a tech team, you can download it and use it yourself. But our next steps are actually expanding our service into a supported version of this, where you can go online, create an account, and just pay per user for how many people you actually want to bring onto your team to start doing observations in your own space. So I'm over time. I'm going to stop talking. We're excited to hear your questions, and we can share more about the future of the project in the question section too. Thanks.
Well, this was awesome. Thank you, Rebecca and Amy. I know there's a lot of excitement about this tool. So hopefully we'll have some time at the end too for some questions, but we're going to move on to our third presentation, Maker Immersion, Developing Curriculum Design and Assessment Skills for Academic Makerspace Course Integration. And I welcome Gretchen Triquet and Katie Music-Puri.
Hello. There we are. And I'm going to go ahead and launch our slideshow. Just one moment. Bear with me. I appreciate it.
While Gretchen's getting that up, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Katie Music Peary. I am an Associate University Librarian at the University of Texas at Arlington. And prior to being in this role, I was the director of our Fab Lab for about 8 years. So Gretchen and I have partnered extensively when she was here at UTA as well to develop what we've called maker literacies, which is what we're going to talk about today. And Gretchen, do you want to introduce yourself too?
Sure. My name is Gretchen Triquet, and I'm currently the Director of Libraries at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, but was at UTA for almost 19 years, focused pretty exclusively on learning, student learning. And before I left there was the AUL that was responsible for our learning program and worked closely with the Fab Lab and in that regard.
Awesome. So very similar to what our prior two presentations were talking about. When we first created our Fab Lab 10 years ago, there were a lot of questions both within the libraries and across campus about why are we investing in these technologies? What's the benefit that it can have on our learners, especially in a higher education setting? So that's really the impetus for a lot of the research and the work that we've done over the last couple of years is trying to measure specifically what is gained and learned through making, mostly with curricular making, but we've also tried to intentionally partner with disciplines across the academy. So our makerspaces are open to all of our disciplines. They're not exclusive to engineering or the arts, and really kind of discovering and digging into what the librarian's role in that process should look like and how we can better prepare librarians for that work in the future. So this started with an IMLS grant as well, not the project grant, the planning grant where we kind of developed an initial list of the same, transferable values, career-ready skills that we believed students were gaining through the act of making in our spaces, and then piloted that with other universities across the country to kind of refine that list. And in addition to refining the list of competencies, we were also assessing both the faculty and the librarians on what they felt like. Was it a beneficial partnership? Did they feel like they had the skills that they needed to do this job well? And ultimately what we found is that many of the librarians felt ill-equipped to partner with faculty in the curriculum development process. So our second grant was focused on refining those competencies, but also on creating some education and outreach to library and makerspace staff to help better equip them to say, okay, here's what your unique expertise is within this arena. You're not the subject matter expert that the faculty member is, but you do have teaching experience, curricular development experience, and you have experience using some of these tools. So it really needs to be a partnership between all 2 or 3 parties. Sometimes the librarians have the expertise with the tools. Sometimes the librarian is also partnering with the makerspace staff so that there's domain expertise within all 3 areas to create an assignment that truly gets to the heart of the subject learning outcomes that the faculty member is trying to achieve. So ultimately, through the course of all of that work, we have whittled things down to this list of 10 competencies. And as you can see, there's some great overlap with what our previous presenters were talking about, where it's not just the skills that you need to know to operate XYZ machine. These are transferable skills that extend far beyond the makerspace or how to use a 3D printer. We're talking about things like engaging in effective teamwork, knowledge management, how to assess whether you even need to make in the first place or whether you should buy a solution. What's the cost benefit of engaging in that type of work? So in addition to creating this list of 10 competencies, we've also created a set of rubrics so that when we're partnering with faculty, we can kind of delve deeper into what they can actually be looking for and observing and assessing when in the act of making. So Gretchen, do you want to talk a little bit more about the domains?
Yes, sure. I want to just add really quickly as well that these competencies, the rubrics, the creation of a framework is the byproduct of, I think, about 6 or 7 different iterations with feedback from both faculty and librarians, letting us know when the language didn't make sense or they saw too much overlap between some of the content. And so I think what was at one point maybe 17 or 18 competencies was condensed down into 10. And then to facilitate the use of the materials even more in the development of lesson plans, we created a framework so that they could more easily figure out what they wanted to lean into when working with students. So the 10 competencies were divided into 4 different frameworks: inquiry, foundational practice, managed practice, and transferred knowledge. There is overlap between the competencies that exist within those, and the expression of which is going to depend on sort of the artifact of student learning and the alignment with a subject-based learning outcome. From there, again, with multiple iterations, we developed rubrics for each competency. Within each competency, there are sub-competencies, and then an articulation in the rubrics of what someone would expect to see if a student were either engaging us in either expert, proficient, developing, or emerging way. Additionally, there is adaptable language in all of these tools so that when you define that context, it can be better articulated in the terms of the subject area in which the teaching was happening. This was very much a byproduct of the conversations that we often had with students, where they were trying to understand why making was a part of the work that they were being asked to do in a course that would not necessarily had a maker component to it. Whereas our engineers and our art students had a high level of comfort with making as part of their subject-based learning. This was more atypical in humanities-based courses and some of the social sciences. And so we wanted to make sure that everything that was produced, that it could be adapted so that faculty could demonstrate how the subject-based learning was closely tied to what the students were being asked to do and what it might look like if they were doing it well. Additionally, with our roles changing, me leaving UTA and Katie moving into a different role, there's still work that should be done in this area, I think, to further develop this. I think we have developed these tools. We've done a one-day immersion as part of that, but I think that there is opportunity for the creation of local and regional professional development activities around these skills. I've found coming to a new institution, I've had to start from scratch. So having the same conversations with our librarians about experiential education, about pedagogical development and lesson planning, and I think having a network of folks having the same conversations in a regional setting would be incredibly beneficial. We are still trying to continue to add and grow a repository for open curricula so that there is opportunity for reuse and remix. And rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, when many of our faculty are hoping to have some of the same learning achieved by their students. And then finally, and I think much of this was addressed today, so it was kind of hard for me to transition into presenter mode from learner mode as I was listening to the prior 2 presentations. I think there is a lot of work to be done around articulating student growth in the affective domain and talking about the dispositions of a maker, things like resilience, curiosity, confidence, and how do we make that part of the academic endeavor? I think it's something that is more commonly discussed within the context of public and just open use of makerspaces rather than looking at that as a sort of a measurable skill that we would like to determine within a curricular and academic setting. In order to access the rubrics and the competencies, as well as the current repository, the website is listed here, but if you just go to UTA, if you Google UTA Maker Literacies, you will easily be able to navigate to that. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Katie and Gretchen. This was another amazing tool. We have a few minutes, about 5 minutes for questions. If you have them, feel free to unmute and ask your question. You can also put it in the chat. I just saw a lot of enthusiasm so far for these tools, but feel free to post any questions. I'll ask one while we're waiting too. I'm just curious in either of these cases, if either of you have an example of how, the data from the observation deck or this maker competency tool was really applied, like just a short specific example of how someone used the data from that to change something or to make a switch in their space.
Yeah, I can go ahead and share it, Lisa. I shared an example of a report that we put forward. And I can share my screen or I can drop it in the chat. Give me just 1 second. So we did a series of observations about our Bubbler Artist in Residence program, which was an opportunity for us to share I'm sorry, I'm not saying this very well, which was an opportunity for us to observe our artists in residence that were happening across all of our libraries over the course of a single summer. And I just shared the report of being able to actually talk about what we were observing in the space. And so the goals that we had set for the program were around creativity and self-expression and like making connections or social emotional work. And through the observation, we were able to see that the creativity and self-expression sort of component came to the foreground. And we were really happy and pleased with that. But we got a little bit of question from, I think, some of our stakeholders around more of an emphasis for school age things around problem solving, right? They wanted more opportunities for kids to like have agency and solve real world problems. And so by really honing in and looking at the programs that had done that successfully, we were able to have a team conversation about how were those programs set up differently versus the ones that supported more of our like creativity and open-ended response, like process-based learning, in order to think about redesigning some of our school age specific programs to fit more of those competencies.
Thank you. I see Kwang Kwan has a question, has her hand up, so I'll turn it to her.
Hi, I'm very excited to see all the great tools and opportunities. I wondered, any of you, when you measure, what you measure in terms of your value is rather organizational or community levels. That was something to do with my keynote presentation, that like some of the needs to assess like our values to a broader level. So I'm actually really excited about the possibility of doing it with one of your tools like ODAX, but any of you have tried to assess, like, for example, community building or public good, third spaces, something like that?
I can speak a little bit. So our frameworks, both for the learning spaces and the programs, have connections back to our strategic plan and our core values of community, collaboration, compassion, and curiosity. 4Cs. And then we also have focus areas right now of cultivating connectedness and belonging, and then providing services that resonate. So within the programming report, we're looking at 3 like big buckets of learning and exploration, making connections, and engagement. I would say all 3 of those connect back to our strategic plan and focus areas. we get a little bit more granular with the learning spaces. I I can't say that we're like putting this all in and putting a number on it of like 75% of interactions connect back to this, but we're starting to look at general trends to help influence how we're reporting and then how it's connecting back to the broader scope of things.
So I was just going to add a thought related to both of the questions. The first question about how these have been used in order to improve or hone in on, I can give both a sort of an example of how continued use helped streamline a lesson plan in the work. Katie's folks in the Fab Lab did a lot of work with, it was actually an engineering course that the focus of it was project management. And a key component of that was the collaborative work and the teamwork piece of things. And it started off where the approach to doing that was that students randomly created their own teams, and the learning that happened related to teamwork from just a random selection of who you were going to work with wasn't reaching sort of the level of outcome or the level of success that the instructor and the makerspace and the staff member and librarian were hoping for. And so that assignment was later revised in order to use like inventories and assessment tools, looking at the strengths of different folks enrolled in the class. And then that was used as a framework in order to determine who you would choose to be in on your team and the role they might play. So that's an example of a class that had very many iterations. Here at my new institution, this was not part of the culture that I came into, was the librarians really thinking about things in experiential education, sort of pedagogical framework. And in this case, it was an example of a newer faculty member. It was maybe their first year teaching, and they were very the conversation hadn't happened about what he had really hoped his students would get out of the class that was transferable. And after the first iteration of that, we were able to sit down with the competencies and talk through what it is that he wished his students would have taken away from it that maybe they didn't. And we were able to use the competencies as a way to do that. As far as the community assessment piece, that is not something that it was intended with these tools, but that question actually sort of has inspired me. There's work that we're doing at my institution currently around a curricular approach to like student affairs and student development work, and the libraries is part of that, specifically looking at our student employment and library as third space. And so it has inspired me a little bit to think about how we might adopt some of the competencies, but have it framed more in the work that we're doing that is related to community engagement and sense of belonging. And so I can't say we've done it, but it's an inspiring thought.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. These sessions are flying by, but I love all these connections people are making. I'm making them in my brain too, even from listening to all of these talks. So I'm so thankful to have this day with all of you. So we are going to move on now to another break. And then in about, I guess, 17 minutes, the next breakout sessions will start. So enjoy your break and we'll see you all back soon.
Okay, welcome. It is right at time. We are going to get started with track E, learning and facilitating. We're excited for 3 really great lightning talks this afternoon. Our first lightning talk is going to be a pre-recorded talk from Kyung-Won Ko, who gave one of our keynotes this morning. And it will be co-teaching and the role of school librarians in facilitating maker learning in schools. So we will go ahead and get started with that one.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Kyung-Won Ko, Associate Professor and Director of the Champaign-Urbana Community Fab Lab at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. My lightning talk in this session focuses on maker learning in formal school environments, especially the role of school librarians. This presentation is part of my previous IMLS-funded study titled Learning in Libraries, Guided Inquiry Making and Learning, in which I collaborated with Norman Public Schools in Oklahoma to integrate maker learning into standard curricula across elementary, middle, and high schools. Let me begin with the background of this research, maker learning in schools. Given the power and benefits of making as a learning approach, now supported by numerous research studies, it is a matter of equity that every learner has the opportunity to engage in maker learning through school education, rather than limiting it to those who can afford to learn and create in out-of-school environments. However, efforts to incorporate maker learning and, more importantly, to develop maker mindset and a maker culture in schools have revealed several challenges. For example, how can you preserve the interest-driven and creative spirit of maker learning while operating within a standards-based curriculum? Also, the logistics of incorporating making in schools are complex. Challenges include prescribed standard, rigid schedules, teacher-student ratios, budget and staff time constraints. This study addresses these broader challenges of implementing maker learning and, more generally, any learner-centered approach within formal school settings. It does so by focusing on the role of school librarians and exploring co-teaching as a specific instructional technology approach. So here are quick definitions of key terms. In this research, we define maker learning as a hands-on learning approach through which learners create, design, tinker, experiment, and share projects using a range of technologies. Co-teaching is a specific style of instructional collaboration and partnership that occurs when 2 or more educators bring different expertise and assume complementary roles to plan, teach, and assess together with shared responsibilities. So the goal of this study was to deepen our understanding of the role of school librarians in co-teaching learner-centered instruction, such as maker learning, with classroom teachers. We investigated how educators taught 35 maker learning and inquiry units within a public school system over 3 years. And using interviews and field observations, the research involved 25 educators, including school librarians and classroom teachers from different disciplines, such as social studies, science, language art, and math. Each school had at least one school librarian holding a master's degree in library and information studies. Let's dive right into the key findings. The findings show that the role of the school librarians in co-teaching extended through all areas of the instructional process, including working with classroom teachers on co-planning, co-implementing, and co-assessing the maker learning unit. The librarians also took on the role of coaching teachers in their areas of expertise. I'll highlight just a few key findings, and I encourage you to check out the full paper published in School Library Research. I'll share a QR code to the article at the end of this talk. Co-planning. So a significant part of the co-planning occurred through co-planning. Librarians said it was very important to be involved from the beginning, the planning process with the teachers. During the co-planning prior to the unit, school librarians did lots of scheduling, designing units, creating instructional documents such as maker journals and rubrics, and curating resources for student research and making. Throughout the unit, unstructured and on-the-fly planning continued between the teachers and librarians for making changes throughout the semester. Co-implementing. So during the implementation of the unit, the school librarians led instruction in their areas of expertise, such as maker technologies, led exploratory sessions in their school library makerspaces, and delivered information literacy instruction lessons. And they also provided individual and small group assistance for the learners, as well as classroom management assistance throughout the unit. In their informal and individual coaching, the school librarians focused on figuring out when students truly needed one-on-one help versus when students could learn best by experimenting and trial and errors on their own. So by stepping in at the right moments, they guided the students through common challenges and helped them keep going. We found that many of the effective teaching methods used by school librarians in this study were based on cognitive apprenticeship. So cognitive apprenticeship involves an expert helping a less experienced person by providing structure and examples to support learning. So this is a social learning theory where learning happens through social interactions and guidance, such as scaffolding, modeling, mentoring, and coaching. For example, a school librarian described how she modeled problem solving when the technology doesn't work. So she said, my preference is just work through with kids and use that as a model for a growth mindset and how to deal with the struggle and just be honest and say, hey, my audio is not working. Let's see, I'm going to think through this, what works and what doesn't. Classroom teachers highlighted how helpful it was to have another experienced educator in their classroom when they implemented a highly personalized learning program in their classroom of 20 to 30 students. The teachers and librarians also worked together on assessment, so co-assessing took place before, during, and at the end of the unit, and both formal evaluation and informal monitoring and feedback were used. One noticeable observation was the educators modified the existing rubrics because initially students tended to select an easy and safe maker project to earn a good grade rather than a more risk-taking and innovative project. So the revised rubric placed more emphasis on the learning process and the risk-taking aspect. So there are many other interesting findings. And again, I encourage you to check out the full paper. And this study suggests that co-teaching and the role of school librarians significantly mitigate challenges of learner-centered instructions in school, including maker learning. So here are some of the implications we have. School librarians are encouraged to develop their expertise in maker learning, emerging technologies, and learner-centered instructional approaches and methods, such as co-teaching and cognitive apprenticeship. Classroom teachers should seek out and embrace co-teaching opportunities with school librarians to enhance learner-centered instruction. And finally, schools must hire qualified school librarians to support creative learning and properly equip students for our fast-changing and complex society. Administrators should focus a culture of instructional collaboration and offer professional development that brings school librarians and teachers together. Improving our public formal education takes a lot of work and persistence. And although I'm not saying that Maker Learning is a silver bullet, in my years of working with schools, I've seen how, for some students who otherwise struggled, a maker program, a maker space become a bright spot in their lives and the reason they wanted to go to school. So thank you to everyone who has put tremendous effort into this area. And thank you for joining us today. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Great. Okay. Now we will welcome Soo-hyun Kim, who will be presenting Family Makers, promoting engineering learning for children and caregivers through online making programs at rural libraries. So Soo-hyun, take it away.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, my name is Soo-hyun Kim. I'm currently an assistant professor of library and information science at Indiana University in Indianapolis. I'm really excited to present our work on behalf of our amazing research team. So makerspaces are informal sites for creative production, right? And while makerspace generally refers to physical spaces where people have access to tools, expertise, and facilitation, it also includes the intangible communities and programming for creating and sharing. So in that sense, I argue that makerspace can exist without a physical space if the ethos of creating, collaborating, and sharing is supported. So makerspace and my work are understood broadly from dedicated physical space to small-scale services and programming in both in-person and online settings. There can be many goals for library makerspace, and one of the goals that we are looking at is to broaden STEM learning opportunities. And there's been continuous efforts to broaden STEM participation at public libraries. However, research that leverages the online space to strengthen public libraries' maker programming is rarely examined. So we contend that an online making program offering take-home kits, hotspots, and tablets for community members to participate via video conferencing software has the potential to expand and broaden STEM learning at rural libraries. And the study I'm presenting today, called Family Makers, builds on this rationale with the goal to develop an online engineering program for children and parents that's facilitated by rural libraries. I'm the PI of the study, and it's in collaboration with University of Cincinnati and 7 rural libraries. We also collaborate with engineers who grew up in rural communities and the Association of Rural and Small Libraries. The study is also funded by IMLS. These are the 7 rural library partners who collaborated with us to co-design and facilitate Family Makers online program. Since Family Makers is an online program, we provided tablets, hotspots if families needed them, and our target was caregivers and children 5 to 10 years old. There were a total of 6 programs, each lasting for a little over an hour. And we had 3 goals. We first aimed to develop a field-tested online engineering program tailored for rural libraries and rural residents. And by doing so, we aim to develop children and parents' understanding of engineering and participation in engineering practices. And also expect librarians to develop new understanding of engineering and develop confidence in facilitating engineering program. Our work is shaped by culturally relevant pedagogy and constructionism to focus our engineering programs on the everyday making activities in rural communities. And so we integrated engineering within children's community contexts, providing challenges that stem from relatable experiences. We also made connection to broader engineering community by recruiting 10 engineers who grew up in a rural community. They created a day in the life of a rural engineer video using GoPro kits that we sent, which were utilized during our online sessions. And engineers also came into our last session to share what they do and celebrate what families have made. There are 3 phases in this project. In phase 1, we aim to first understand challenges rural librarians and families experience in supporting children's engineering learning. Then we explored how these challenges can be addressed through rural families' funds of knowledge. Funds of knowledge is a theoretical framework that takes a strength-based approach to consider learners' home, cultural, and everyday experiences as valuable learning resources. And for the sake of time, I'll just quickly share one of the main challenges and funds of knowledge we found in phase 1. The main challenge for supporting children's engineering engagement that both librarians and caregivers mentioned were their lack of confidence and knowledge in engineering. Overall, there was a lot of concern and even fear and anxiety around having to support children with engineering learning when they did not know too much or have experience in engineering. However, what was most exciting to discover from phase 1 was families and librarians' engineering-related funds of knowledge that we leveraged when we co-designed the curriculum. So our analysis showed that participants routinely engaged in household management practices, such as fixing household machines, making home improvements, fixing patio, working on their vegetable gardens and yards, laying tiles, coming up with a creative recipe that utilizes leftover ingredients. So we found that everyday skills and expertise acquired through familiar community and recreational practices facilitated rural children's development of teamwork, system thinking, ethical reasoning, and scientific and mathematical knowledge, which were all essential for engaging in the engineering design process. So in phase 2, we co-designed Family Makers online program with 7 rural librarians around these funds of knowledge to create an engineering curriculum that's culturally relevant and engaging. And in phase 3, we will focus on dissemination by generating training materials. So for today's presentation, I'll be sharing findings from one of the studies we did in phase 2 that asked, how did children, caregivers, and rural librarians' perception and understanding of engineering change as a result of participating in Family Makers program? 7 librarians, 14 parents, and 17 children filled out pre- and post-survey and participated in an interview before and after participating in 6 Family Makers program. For librarians, we additionally collected video records of their participation during 8 co-design sessions. So based on survey analysis, we found that children who participated in Family Makers had increased in their STEM efficacy and attitude. And for engineering and technology specifically, the mean score went up from 4.14 to 4.33. And similarly, parents who participated also had increase in the mean score for engineering knowledge, attitude, and behavior. And similar results were also observed in librarians. And due to small sample size, we only ran descriptive statistics, but these results were still very exciting. And interview analysis demonstrated that prior to participating in Family Makers, children lacked knowledge and experience in engineering. As you can see in these quotes, children thought engineering was just about machines and building stuff. However, after participating in 6 online sessions, children demonstrated expanded understanding of engineering, acknowledged different types of engineering, and saw the relevance of engineering in their lives and how it impacts their community. And for the sake of time, I will not present the findings from parents and librarians, but however, similar findings of their understanding being expanded was observed. So for parents, in addition to having an expanded understanding, they expressed that they are viewing creativity and exploration more positively and shifted to fostering these values more at home. And several participants also noted their perception and confidence in STEM changed. So we see that this is an important learning outcome, as learning ways to support their children will have an impact in how they guide and support their children within home environments and everyday life. Now, for librarians, the analysis of librarians' initial interview illustrated that rural librarians had lack of confidence in engineering, as evidenced by some of these adjectives such as nervous, scared, terrified, not sure. However, after co-designing the curriculum and facilitating 6 online sessions, librarians mentioned that it helped them to broaden their view of engineering and provided confidence that they could do engineering. Let me quickly read this interview excerpt from Crystal. One of the lies I tell myself is I'm not good at math, I'm not a science person. But doing these co-design activities and just seeing that it's so wider than this narrow view of it, which made me go, okay, I could do this, and I'm not bad at math. That's just what I tell myself. And I am an engineering person because I engineer stuff all the time. I just don't call it that. So our work highlights the effectiveness of a culturally relevant engineering curriculum co-designed by library staff. By leveraging families' cultural practices of making and funds of knowledge from everyday life, it fostered knowledge, attitude, and understanding of engineering among rural children, parents, and library staff alike. Building on these findings, the study suggests several implications. Our study showed that engineering learning can occur in remarkably non-engineering related activities in everyday life. So to lower the entry barriers of patrons who might be hesitant to participate in an engineering program, we advocate to expand our understanding of what counts as engineering to include problem-solving skills found in everyday rural life, such as cooking, gardening, DIY projects, and sports. And recognizing that engineering knowledge is not confined to professional expertise, but can be also found in everyday familiar practices, can help librarians in designing library-based engineering program. Sorry. And with this in mind, we invite future research to further investigate different ways of developing culturally relevant engineering learning experiences within public library making programs. And if you want to know more, please visit our project website. And finally, I would like to acknowledge that this work is developed on many, many people's work. And lastly, I would like to thank IMLS for funding this study. Thank you.
Okay, Soo-hyun, thank you so much for that great presentation. We will have time at the end of the session for questions. I know I already am bubbling up some questions for Soo-hyun's amazing project, but we will move on to the next and last of our lightning talks in this session, and it will be by Michael Tizenbaum and Nathan Holbert. Connected Spaces, a technological framework for fostering collaboration by linking novice makers with mentors and peers. So I will hand it off to our presenters.
Thanks, all. Just apologies that Nathan Holbert couldn't make it, so I'll be speaking on behalf of both of us today. And this is some work that we've been doing. It's funded in a large part by an NSF DRK-12 grant. So shout out to them and thank you for all of that. And so the sort of rationale behind what we started this project originally during the pandemic, and understanding that it was difficult for people who were doing making to potentially connect with others because we were all fairly isolated. And it rose up some questions for us about, well, there's lots of places where people perhaps are not always connected together, might feel like they're on an island, might be looking to understand how they can develop their sense of identity and community within making, and how we could sort of think about developing tools and structures that could support this kind of learning at a distance, this more distributed notions of community and expertise and mentorship. And so, based on that, we began building a set of tools which we have called connected spaces. Hopefully this turns, there we go. And connected spaces is essentially a technological toolkit and design framework to connect geographically distributed middle and high school learners interested in fabrication and making to like-minded colleagues. Now, that sounds a bit vague, but really what I'm going to do now is show you how some of these tools work, and give you a sense of how we envision, or actually through our work, how some of this has come together. So the first one is a dashboard. And on the surface, it's fairly simple. You know, we've seen a lot of sort of dashboardy kind of things happen before in makerspaces. But there's a couple things that we did here that are perhaps a little different. Um, we give so the students get to put their name in, a little bit about themselves. You'll also notice the pictures on the right, we allow for a lot of artistic creativity for kids to express who they want to be and how they want to show themselves to others. Because we recognize that, you know, within these sort of communities, self-expression, being able to represent yourself as an individual is critically important. So what happens is you basically create your bio on the left side here. And another piece to it too, I don't know if my mouse is showing them, but you choose affinities. And affinities are a little different than, say, badging systems. Badging systems are often things that you must earn. And we've found, and other research has shown, that actually badging systems can be really problematic in terms of giving people a sense of identity and belongingness, because there's some arbitrary thing that says you haven't qualified to talk about these things. You don't get to see yourself as someone who does LEDs because you haven't crossed some sort of threshold. But there's actually a lot of stuff in learning sciences literature that says you know, you don't have to be an expert to be useful to help people learn or for you to learn yourself. We actually just want you to engage. So we allow it to be affinities. Kids choose the things themselves that they are interested in, that it says, hey, I am interested in talking to anybody about any of these topics at any point in time. So you may not be an expert in LEDs, but you want to talk. If somebody wants to talk through their project and say, hey, I just want to talk through what I'm doing with my LEDs, are you available to do that? That to us is actually far more empowering and helps support those kind of critical ideas around identity and belongingness in these spaces that badging systems are often exclusionary around. And so as each person does this, all of their individual profiles show up on a large ambient display in each space. And the way we've designed it is actually we can have multiple spaces linked together. So you may have a library in one part of the city and a library at the other, and those kids may be doing things that are similar or complementary in different spaces, and all of the profiles show up in both spaces. And so that lets kids see that, oh, there's others doing work similar to them. There's other kids doing work that kind of connects with them. If I need help, then I can reach out, perhaps to even somebody in another space. Now, how you reach out and the kind of work you could do can often be challenging when there people are in different spaces. So don't worry, I'm going to show you a little bit about how you could do that as well. Another way that we've been looking at for supporting students in developing, you know, this sense of community, this sense of how we belong, is making progress. It's a tool that allows you to really quickly record anything at any point in time, and either as a static image, as a video, you could add speech to it and captions, right? And publish it to a display that's located in each of the spaces as well. So it's this kind of like ongoing sort of like quick little feeds about what everybody's doing or about what you're doing as opportunities to connect and reflect and say, oh, look, somebody else is doing a project that's very similar to mine. That is another opportunity for me to talk and connect with them, right? And we've been adding some multimodal AI supports to this as well. Students could ask to generate a slideshow of their project. So like all the things they've done over time, but we've also seen that it's able to pick out things that kids are working on, like LEDs or particular wires. And so we're looking at seeing if this kind of tool could be like, I want to know everybody who's working on things with proximity sensors. And can the AI look at the images across all of these and go, yeah, actually, this student and this student and this student's work seems to indicate they're working on things that are similar to you. Should we make a connection between the two of you? And so, you know, other ways of kids recognizing, representing themselves and connecting with their peers. Now, the one thing I haven't really talked about yet is how you connect these kids and these groups going across these different spaces. So one of the other tools we've created is called the Reach Projector. And the Reach Projector is actually this work by one of my PhD students. And what it is it's hard to show over a Zoom, but it's a system that sits over the working table, and it's got a projector and a camera. And what you could do is the thing you're working on, you could place it, as you can see in the top image, under this projection and camera system. And the camera will pick up what you've put underneath and project it in another space anywhere else in the world. And so, and then the person in the other spot in the world can see what you're working on and can put their fingers or put objects on or around the piece that you placed, and the camera in their space picks that up and projects it back in the original space. So now we can have people actually collaborating and working together on real physical objects across all over the world. So we've used this thing to have kids work on debugging projects or talking about their projects with people in Champaign and in New York in real time. We've also had them do it with people in Italy and Costa Rica, right? And so creating real networks of experts and learners working together to debug, connect on their projects. So what this does is we have the first two tools that allow kids to kind of understand how they're connected with others, right? Understand what ways people are working together that may be complementary, ways of finding others when you may be looking for help or looking to talk with someone through your design. And then we have tools like Reach that allow you to actually get together and do the kinds of really hard face-to-face work in much more seamless ways than we've ever seen possible in distributed forms. So I'll go really quick because I realize we're running a little short on time. But we found that this is facilitating new forms of collaborative making, where the kids are able to do these things that we're calling boundary spanning, right? Actually collaborating and debugging and working across physical spaces in ways that otherwise have been largely impossible, right? And that overall, this suite of tools, I could get into it, but we used a combination of a coding scheme we have around computational action and something that Nasir and Cooks have talked about, which is resources for supporting identity and belongingness and within sort of maker or computing spaces, and that the suite of these tools have been shown to actually positively impact kids' senses of identity as being part of an authentic computing community, about being able to feel like the things they're doing are being advanced or being recognized because of these tools. I'm happy to talk more about this, but I wanted to, we've got a fairly quick 10-minute talk. And in terms of libraries for this, what I want to make clear is I think these tools, we looked at it across makerspaces, but libraries are often networks of spaces that are doing similar projects, maybe even at the same time, synchronously or asynchronously, but they're often disconnected that the kids don't know that there's others doing that work. And they may feel like some of these libraries may be smaller spaces where it's like, oh, it's just a couple of us doing this, feeling kind of isolated, right? Well, this can allow you to have recognition or awareness of what others are doing in this real time. It can, again, support these kids to connect to these larger communities. And through all of this, we believe, and we're starting to show through our work, it has more opportunities to share projects, expertise, mentorship, and the impact of the things that they design in these maker spaces, both locally and globally. I'll stop there. Thank you so much for the time, and happy to answer any questions.
Wow, okay. Mike, thank you so much. That was amazing. All of these tools that you've created to connect folks. My mind is blown right now by all of this amazing information. So we have a few minutes for some questions. I don't think I've seen anything in the chat other than a quick one that was answered by Soo-hyun. So please put your questions in chat, or if you can raise your hand, you do have the power to unmute yourself now so you can ask questions. So we will open the floor. I know I had an amazing question for Soo-hyun, and it's completely gone out of my mind now. I'll have to email you later, Soo-hyun, after it comes back to me. Okay, Mike, what materials do libraries need to set up a Reach projector?
So we have like a kit that we've kind of put together and we're hoping to make available writ large. But if you reached out, basically it uses a Arduino or not Arduino, sorry, a Raspberry Pi small computer and then an associated camera and projector. One of the things we've been really trying to do is make it low cost so that you could set one up for around $60 each. I think it's probably a little bit more than that, but not a lot more. And then we have blueprints for laser cutting the sort of stand that holds it together.
Okay, great. Yeah, because I mean, I just I want to, if please raise your hand if you have a question or put it in chat. And but I can imagine, we do through the Core Maker Technology Interest Group, we do tours of makerspaces to kind of connect, and we see that there's a lot of, things that we have in common, a lot of similar projects. But I can just imagine these setups where we're sharing projects. Okay, so Mike, from Cindy Co. I may have missed it. What was the platform you used to set up the CXS dashboard?
Yeah, so it's basically just a web service that we set up and it runs in Firebase. So it's pretty easy to set up if you've got like, you could set it up like on a local server in like, I'll say an hour. But it's all just open source. We built it in Unity for the dashboard, but it's all set up, it's all open source. So, and uses Firebase. So once you've got the package, there's nothing you need outside of just web browsers, essentially.
Yeah. I love that it was built during COVID to connect folks who couldn't get together in person, but I think that it's also just an alternate way for students who may not, or anyone, adults who may not feel as comfortable connecting in person. Maybe they just want to connect in a different way. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. I guess, let me see if I can get my question. Put together for Sue Hyun. In the meantime, while we give everyone a chance to think, we do have a few more 4 minutes. Soo Hyun, I know you were working with like families and children, when you're talking about engineering education. But do you think that's something that could be used with other audiences, other age groups?
Is your question, I just wanted to clarify your question first. Are you asking if the same curriculum could be applied to different age group or
Not exactly the same curriculum, but the same concepts in terms of kind of reframing, how folks think about like engineering education.
Mhm. I think it can be applied regardless of your age or it's the culturally relevant ways of approaching or introducing engineering is we've seen that it's applicable to librarians who are adults, parents of various age groups, right, and children. And it's just a more culturally and personally relevant way of understanding engineering because learners get to actually make connections and build new understanding with existing sources of information, right? So something that may have been a foreign concept, a very abstract concept, is now made sense because of these building blocks, whether it's a different prior experience or shared knowledge within the family experience, or so using that as a building block to introduce and engage in engineering, I think that can be applicable to regardless of who you are.
Yeah. Like I'm thinking of using it with college students in terms of kind of connecting it to their prior experience and saying like, oh, like, you've you've maybe like fixed a car before. You know what I mean? Like you've done this before, then you have engaged in this type of thinking and you've engaged in this type of work before. So just kind of like lowering the intimidation factor a little bit. So
I think that's one of the exciting things that we're finding, that lowering that anxiety, and that can be done. That can be done. So that's exciting to see.
yeah. So great. Okay. Well, I really appreciate all of the presenters today. We all appreciate and we are at time, so I will let you all go and we will see you at the closing session. Thank you.